Hi, I'm Chelsea Meadus, and I want to represent you on Maple Ridge City Council. Take action, get involved, and learn about the issues that matter most in our community. On November 15th, come out, show your support. A lot is riding on this election. You matter, and together we will do better.
Okay, so we're here to talk about education today. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Sure, thanks.
I'm Susan Carr.
I'm James Rowley.
And I'm Mike Murray.
Awesome.
Great.
So today we're going to ask you some questions, and the first question that we have prepared is, what role do school trustees play?
Okay.
Okay, I'll start with that one. So I guess, let's see, the best way I can explain it is if you think of a pie, and you've got Ministry of Education, and you've got staff, teachers, support staff, all the partner groups, and then the other slice of that pie would be trustees who basically represent the public voice in that pie.
Yeah, and so from my perspective, trustees are there to support students in achieving what they need to achieve in their education. And there's a number of things that we do to do that. The first thing we have to do, of course, is look a lot and visit schools and listen to people and find out from students what they need and parents. Once we've done that, we need to think about the kind of policies that we set and the strategic plan that we set to try and achieve those needs, or to try and meet those needs. And then we got to track our progress against that. So if the whole organization has goals and objectives that are all leading toward helping students meet their needs, then collectively we need to see, okay, how are we doing? And we need to keep on checking against that to ultimately make sure we're getting to where we want to go.
And we use a lot of data that is kept and tracked by the schools themselves. Teachers, principals, our senior staff, they track data, and they're constantly checking it throughout the school year to see, okay, where are we at? Where do we need to go? Do we need to tweak something to, stay on the right track to achieve success for kids?
I'm not a trustee at the moment, but when I came in and brought my kids into the district, I looked at, you could really tell the difference between this district and others. So clearly trustees have an influence, and the board can really have an influence. We have the environmental school, we have a cyber school. So I think another piece of the puzzle that we've been talking about lately also is a connection to the funders, which is the province. And that has been a really big topic right now, that there's a disconnect too. I think we're going to talk about this later, but the advocacy is also a role of the board.
It's a huge role.
Yeah, so
it's a really important role.
Yeah, and there certainly has been advocacy going on, and I can tell it. I'm not on the trustee, but if you can read it on the website. And to my mind, the provincial government has not been listening. So they're not really listening to the boards of education, which is a problem. We need to find out what we can do about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So advocating for more dollars is certainly part of what we need to do. There are a number of things that we are doing, and probably others we can do to try and achieve that. But we've got to keep our dialogue going with the province and demonstrating through, I think, some detail looks at what we can and can't do because of our funding inadequacy. So that's work to be done.
And also too, creating more awareness and more education so that parents know what is going on in the schools. They can be more aware of how certain things affect, the day of, day in the life of their kid at school. So it's all connected.
I'm going to add one more thing here. One of the tough things that trustees have to do is allocate limited resources. So if you don't have enough funding and you have all these needs out here, you have to decide what comes first. And what always has to come first is our students. So we do our best to allocate resources to that, to the classroom, really, as much as possible. Is that enough? No, it's not.
I keep talking to people at the doorstep who have specific stories about
Yeah.
cuts and why kids not getting the help that they need, and even our parent advisory councils are now fundraising for things that are quite necessary in the classroom.
Which wasn't like that, a few years ago when I was on the PAC. It was, extra stuff to teachers in classrooms, and now, they're fundraising for, stuff that's necessary,
I
like
thought one of
computer labs and things like that. It's
One of the good points that the teachers made during the job action was, what happens if we remove the stuff that the teachers have provided? So it's the PACs are chipping into our system, which is supposed to be a
lots of
public
teachers
system.
spend a lot of their own money that they don't get back to buy supplies, and I know that,
Well, they go beyond that too. I mean, my wife was a teacher for 35 years, and kids come to school in from whatever circumstance they come to school from. So, if kids are hungry, I know teachers have fed them. I know other people are setting up breakfast programs and that sort of thing. I can remember many times buying running shoes for kids that just came from families who couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
and you see that a lot. I used
Yeah.
to work as a noon hour supervisor,
Yeah.
so, especially noon hours, so lunchtime, there was lots of, kids that didn't have lunches, and,
There was
there's-
something that keeps coming to my head, which is the expression, if kids are getting love at home, they come to school for an education. But if they're not getting love or other things that they need at home, they come to school. And then that's where their education suffers, because they're getting their emotional needs and their physical nourishment needs at school, when they could be simply learning what they need to learn.
Yeah, we talked to one educator the other day who was describing a breakfast program, and it was much more than just the provision of food.
social.
Yeah, these kids came to school and actually made their breakfast meal together, sat around the table and talked with each other and with the staff who were there with them, almost as if it was somebody's kitchen, and just providing that kind of support. How was your day yesterday, etc. So, schools are meeting a lot of needs beyond educational needs for sure,
Yeah, absolutely.
and it's a tough challenge.
I was just mentioning a parent I just talked to at the door, saying that his child is just a little dyslexic and just not quite getting that extra help that would push them up higher. And I just think of the teachers who I know, like I work with amazing teachers at Hammond Elementary, and they would, it must be heartbreaking to just, I don't have the time in my classroom to help this person. I know full well that they could use a little extra help.
Yeah, we do get some extra money certainly to address special needs in our classrooms. However, things are so tight right now. We've had to do some significant cuts in the last while, and they're tight. So the flexibility you might have to be as responsive as you'd like, I know is not there as much as it was, and that's a concern. So yeah, we certainly do have to work on that.
Seems
The
like-
needs are getting greater with the kids, right? Because, really, every kid deserves to have that little extra, and they're just not.
So we're eating up all your time with the
Yeah.
first
No,
question. Sorry.
Lyndon's
So you have
gonna
another question
take the
for us?
second
Yeah,
question.
we've talked about boards of education briefly, and I'm wondering why is it important to have a board of education?
Interesting question. Well, I think Susan talked about it a little bit earlier when she said our role really is to represent, the citizens of this community. We are elected by those citizens, and so I almost like to turn that question around and say, so what if we didn't have elected representatives from our
If that
community?
piece of the pie was not there.
What would happen? Well, people like the chief executive person of the school district, the superintendent, would be hired by Victoria, the province. And just to give you an example, when we just went through a process of hiring, and we did engage partners, but even some students from the district student advisory council were part of, they spent half an hour with each of the candidates and gave us their feedback before the board made a final decision on that. Would that kind of thing happen? Not likely. And so to me, that's a good example of why we want to have local boards, to ensure that that kind of process takes place. Also, there's things that are different here than there are in Prince George. You talked about the outdoor school.
Yeah.
It might be a little different trying to run an outdoor school in Prince George in the middle of winter. Whereas here, our outdoor school works really well because of the climate. It allows for that program to go on for, I think, all but about 20, 25 days a year.
It's got a great
It's bigger
reputation,
outside.
that one. And I was able to visit, I visited New Westminster, and I think that people should know that the way they vote and the parents and the public in a district makes a big difference as well. Because I talked to them about, in New West, I was talking to somebody on the, I guess the school district staff, and I was saying, any ideas about environmental school? We have this in Maple Ridge, we have that in Maple Ridge, and he said, oh no. Maple Ridge, in New Westminster, people are very traditional, and they would not be interested in that kind of thing. So we're pretty lucky.
Yeah.
Well, and partly because we have parents who come to us and say, this is the kind of education we want for our students.
Plus, we
for our
have
children.
the teacher champions that are willing to kind of go outside the box and try things, which, without them, we wouldn't be able to do it. And all the districts, we're all so different, the different cultures, different availability, things that are available to us, different landscapes. So I think, having locally elected boards who actually, have a vested interest in the community really help to bring that type of personality to the district and create opportunities.
Yeah. So, I know you have some more questions for us.
We
So.
do. Ashley's gonna ask.
Ashley?
Okay, what is the greatest challenge faced by boards of education?
Ooh, I kind of talked about the current one, but maybe we should talk less about that and maybe something long-term. But, why don't you
Well,
go first?
I don't know. The big thing for me is funding, and it sounds a bit like people are, we just need to be more efficient. But I mean, if you really look into it, I mean, these guys have more experience. But it doesn't take much digging to learn that it's been 10 years of cutting, and
You can only get so efficient before
right.
it starts to cut the bone.
Yeah, and then during the teachers' strike, there's criticisms of why didn't the boards of education stand up for teachers in a way, and I think that from what I've seen is that they did in every way that they could, or the tools that they had available to them, and I don't know if the fact that the provincial government isn't listening to these things isn't changing based on feedback and letters and information from the school boards, doesn't mean that it's the school board's fault that funding is not there.
Yeah, but I think we have to accept responsibility for ensuring that we're communicating well with the provincial government
Yeah,
on the
that
issues.
we're getting the message across clearly.
So the last formal correspondence we had with government about our budget situation was in June, and we were a lot more detailed this time than we had ever been before. The message wasn't simply, hey, we need more money because this is getting really hard. It was, here are the things that we cannot do
Because
that we believe we should be doing in a good education system.
Yeah, and I think that's the direction that we need to go.
And we need to, we actually sent copies of all of the budget submissions that we got from the public and staff at the time that we adopted the budget in those budget feedback meetings. We sent the full package of that material along with that letter.
yeah.
Well, the other thing that we did in that letter is we identified a number of requests of government, and those requests were everything from asking them to look differently at how they allocate funding, hold back funding. Every year they hold back a certain amount of money, and from the amount that you would normally receive as a result of the funding formula. And of course, and we get funded based on a certain amount per student. It's a little more complicated now because special needs students get a little bit more in different areas, but basically that's the way it works. But they hold back a certain amount every year because it's based on, initially, on what we estimate our student population is going to be.
Right.
So
And
they
then when we
won't-
get the actual numbers in the fall, if we have a few more students, then presumably we might get a little
We'll
more
release some
money.
more.
And if we had fewer students than we estimated, we'd get a little less money. But the challenge with that is there have been years when the province has held back the money and they used it for something totally different.
So you never know.
So you
Yeah.
never
You
know.
can't count on it.
And so that's an example of how the money that we actually have allocated for public education in the province, we need to look at it differently and use it better, so that we can plan better. And so we've asked that things like that holdback get looked at in much more detail.
It's really hard to, with that type of a model, to plan for anything long-term, really, and some even short-term, because you just never know what you're going to get. So, it's hard to deliver services to kids and support teachers when, you just don't know. I mean, there's some great things that could be put in place, but because we never know, we kind of have to maybe sometimes hold back on those things.
And holding back in a way that we have had to because of that hold back, literally,
Yeah.
is tough when you're cutting budgets.
Is there
Yeah.
a specific area that you think would be suffering because of the budget cutbacks?
Well, one of them that we talked about was classroom size and composition.
Yeah.
And if you look at our budget document from this year, what you'll see is that in both areas, we had to make some adjustments. Now, those adjustments weren't as large as the adjustments that we made in the rest of the budget. For example, we had to cut back on support staff time, clerical staff time in each of the schools. Now, those folks, work very hard in those schools, and so we had to cut back there because we were trying to protect as much money as we could in the classroom. We cut back yet more on maintenance
Yeah.
in our facilities, and we're already at what we think are bare bones. But there's some other bigger things that we can't do. We have, for example, a lot of portables adjacent to schools in the Albion area, and we think it would be great if we could actually go ahead and build a new school in the Albion area. But one of the things that holds us back is that with every new school you build, the overhead cost is $300,000 to $400,000.
And that would have to be taken out of our
Yeah.
budget that we
Yeah.
have now.
So if we're already cutting $5 million, and then you add another $400,000 on top of that. So, yeah, there's things we're not doing.
Yeah, and
I'd like to do.
I think when it comes down to the classroom, you lose that flexibility that we talked about, that the teachers don't have. Well, I didn't expect this child to have difficulty, but this child is having difficulty. Well, I really don't have time to do this properly. We talked, just to go back to the challenge, though. I think that the challenge is a deeper, more challenging challenge. It's not just a school district challenge; it's a societal challenge,
Yeah.
and it's a political challenge. And this is where, as elected representatives of the Maple Ridge School District, I think that we need to be more active on, as individuals, but as a board as well, because we're facing, provincial government has an election in 2 years, and this is the political reality for them. So it's not something that if we just whine and shake our fists at the government and they change things, then that's going to solve everything. Because they're running on a balanced budget. You've heard this promise, we're going to balance the budget. It makes them sound very fiscally responsible. But that's 2 years. What about 10 years? What about 20 years? If we're underfunding education to reach this 2-year goal, we need to get the news out of what's going on in this district, because it has long-term economic and social.
Well, this goes to that thing you were talking about earlier about the disconnect between those who have the responsibility for delivering education locally,
And
which is
those
the
that
local
have the-
boards, and those that have the authority
Of
to
the
set the
financing.
budget. And that is a theme, I think, that we collectively in the province need to pull together with other boards of education and address, which is to make that connection stronger. If you have the responsibility for doing something, you ought to have the authority to set the budgets and obtain the means to do it properly.
Yeah.
And so that's where we think this ought to go, is with a great push for, at the very least, more local board involvement in discussing and setting the provincial education budget.
And all the boards across the province have to push together to get that realized.
And when you guys are, like, what's being considered as budget cutbacks, are the long-term effects being considered in that as well for the students who aren't receiving the help that they need?
Well, that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they
That's
have to
more
be,
serious the
and
problem.
that's what, I mean, all of the information is out there. Like, I think that from what I've heard from trustees in the school, everybody in the school, we have amazing staff. All the numbers are there. I've been impressed with when we know what direction the school district's going in, because that's the research. This is the best possible education. We don't just unilaterally change things in the school. They brought in Alfie Cohn, who my wife and I, as sort of an education guru, I don't want to say that, but came in to talk to staff and parents as well, and he had an evening session for parents to come in and find out what's the rationale behind any of these changes that are going on in the district. So let's bring everybody with us. I have no idea where I was going with that.
Well, let me just jump on this.
Don't jump on me. You look
No, not at all. What I wanted to do was just talk though about your question, which was, so what are the impacts of all of this?
Yeah, and
So,
the seriousness of it.
well, let me try to put it in these terms. In the last 2 years, the board's budget has resulted in a reduction in the number of positions, staff positions, full-time equivalent, of 70 positions. Okay? Now that's over and above any reductions that we might have had to make for declining enrollment. Now, if you have 70 fewer staff in a system, you can't help but pay less attention to your students.
Exactly.
There's just not the time to pay the kind of attention that we should be.
And even though there is, we do have some declining enrollment, and yes, there are less students, but there are more students with greater needs. So with less staff, that is where you find, that's where
Right.
you find the.
So where we are actually with this, let me just finish this off quickly. And so we've got great graduation rates right now, some of the highest in the province, and we're very proud of that, and there's a lot that we're proud of in this district. But that was for students who've now graduated the system, who've come through a system
Like
without
you.
the adjustment, like yourself, without the kind of adjustments that we're having made. So what happens in 12 years when the students who are just starting to come into the system? My grandson is going into kindergarten, or is in kindergarten this year. What happens to those kids if we continue with this kind of tight?
Yeah, you really get this impression that at the budget level in the ministry, or even higher than the ministry, they're setting a budget and they're just saying, look, we need to be more efficient. We just need to reduce their budget, and they're going to have to make do with less, and just do more with less but in an education system that just doesn't happen.
Well, in any system, and you should, outside of a budget, be looking for efficiencies on a constant basis.
Okay, sure, yeah.
You should really be looking for efficiencies all the time, but the reality is, when it comes time to budget, you should be talking about what services you're providing, not
Yeah.
What
efficiencies.
services, and
And
what
The
it's-
efficiencies
services,
should always be there.
yeah.
And when you're looking at a 10-year, 20-year down the road investment in the students,
Yeah.
you should be thinking about what's best for the students, not how can we cut.
And how can we make long-term plans, because we have, you know, kids in our system from kindergarten to grade 12, so for quite a few years. So we need to make sure that those kids, for all those years that they are in our system, have some long-term, we have some long-term plans for them to keep them moving successfully through the system. You know, my youngest is in grade 7, so she's still got high school to go through. What's that gonna look like if we have to keep
If we have to keep
budget
cutting.
cutting?
Yeah.
You know, and it's
Okay.
been budget
Sorry,
cutting
we didn't
every,
know.
Yeah.
I have a
Getting wound
question.
up here.
We have a question from Twitter.
Oh, Twitter, awesome.
And our question is, could you guys address class size and composition?
Oh, I got a thought about class size and composition. Because as you know, it's before the courts. It was taken out of the teacher's contract, and the teachers took the government to court, and they've had 2 settlements, and that is running through, probably up to the Supreme Court. And my thing about class size and composition is that we have so much research that class size and composition is so important to the educational learning environment that we need to smaller class sizes, good for kids, good for the future of the province. Educational assistants, or taking care of the special needs kids,
the support.
very important.
Yeah.
Good that they're integrated into the classroom, but we need support. We have so much information. Why does it have to be in the teacher's company? Why? It is there, and I'm with the teachers on that. At some point, the government needs to be held feet to the fire to say, no, this is what we need to do. And why should it need to be that way? We know how important it is.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, well, so it is before the courts, and if you look just strictly at class size, for example, and I had a bit of a Facebook conversation with somebody the other day who was concerned because the 2002 collective agreement language, which is what teachers are arguing for in the court case, identified, I think, 22 students as the max size for grades 1 to 3 or 4. Her child is in grade 1, I believe. And the ministry language right now, I think the max is 24.
24, 25.
I think it's 24. And we actually have her child in a class in a particular school that happens to have 23 students in it. And so that is typical, and what do we think about that? Well, I can say that the board said when we were addressing this with that same letter on budget that we were concerned about classroom size and composition. We were concerned that our classroom size was pushing the envelope of the ministry max. And that was because we had to make some adjustments in the last 2 budget years that pushed class size up. And that's of concern to us. We always had a great deal of pride that it wasn't, it
That
was
we were
lower.
always under,
Yeah,
and it's getting to the point now where we're just edging towards where it's just not, it's not comfortable. Right? And you know, what's it gonna be like in a few years? Is it, you know, it's not manageable for the teacher, and it's not really fair to the kids.
so in response to that one person who was concerned about her child being in a grade 1 class with 23 kids, would I like it to be 22 or lower? Yes.
Yeah.
Does it meet the ministry max of 24? Yes. But we need to do something in order to achieve what we all would like to see.
yeah, and I think that, again, we need to bring the public into the conversation about these things, because people don't know. People have the impression that, I've talked to a few people that went through, and we had 32 in my classes, and we were fine. And, that was then, but we know better. You know, that we have the research. We know that children in the province will be economically and socially, and all these indicators are going to be better in the future. But again, it's this short-term political thinking, and we need not just shake the fist of the government, we need the whole public to come along, everybody. We need this information.
And it really is a society thing too, as a collective society, you know, it has to be, what are our priorities? Are we, you know, because we have to educate kids, because they're the future. They're the ones that are going into these jobs in the future. And if we don't give them a solid base now, because it's not our priority to do so, then what's it going to look like?
We have council candidates talking about homelessness and drug addiction, and that's a separate issue, but it's not.
But some of it's tied into, you know, if we don't keep kids, you know, keep them in school, keep them engaged, make things relevant for them, then that could turn into the dropout thing and maybe, you know, snowball into the homeless type situation. So it's all kind of connected.
I would agree.
You were going to say?
I have one more question from Facebook, and it's, well, I'll answer this one first. How far are you guys willing to go for more funding?
Oh, great question.
Well, some of us have talked about, okay, what's the next step in our current plan, and following along from that. And then I guess what I would take it to is, how far is that? So we've sent correspondence, and we have received an indication that we should be having a meeting with the Minister of Education in the not too distant future, I would assume after the election. Now, how far does that go? Well, it depends, I guess, on what kind of dialogue we have and what kind of answers we get to the questions that we've raised about all of these things. There were several very specific questions that we've asked, and I would like to hear what the responses are. Now, if that doesn't go to the point of changing, because all of it is intended to change the kind of resourcing we get, if that doesn't, then we certainly need to engage other people in that discussion. And ultimately, we may need to be talking even to the education critic from one of the other major parties. And if we're getting to the point where we need to ask about education policy from those parties and get clarification before going into an election, then that's what we need to do. But I think the critical thing is parent involvement, citizen involvement. Teachers and boards of education are seen sometimes as being self-serving in our requests.
Yeah, I want to say I respect the work that and the position. I wouldn't be able to begin this without Mike and Susan have this experience with the way things work. But I don't think that we have to wait for these processes, which would be concurrent, to start engaging the public. And I think that
No, absolutely not.
Twitter and Facebook, as we're seeing, are effective tools. And as long as we're respectful to start out with, well, always respectful, but let's tweet and let's Facebook out some, post some of these facts, because people are way too busy. I'm a parent.
And we do have a school district Facebook page.
Yeah.
Which is.
So I'm very interested in seeing how can we get out the advocacy. I don't know if the district Facebook page is.
Well, one of the things you talked about was getting examples. So we talk about the specific things we've heard about, but if we have people expressing to us what their personal experience has been, what their child's personal experience has been,
Some documentation.
and expressing concern about that, and we can get that documentation. We kind of started down that road with what we were trying to do before by getting into some detail to say this is what happened.
And some of all those letters and input that we sent along with that letter to government.
But I think that we should get back to the question, because the question is how far are you willing to go?
How far are you willing to go?
And I think what we're talking about is, during this teacher strike, I think teachers could be forgiven for feeling that they were taking one for the team, that they were stepping out there for education. And I think that we have a real opportunity because we have a teacher's contract which will be good for another 5 years.
Yeah.
We have a 4-year term here. That's 4 years of advocacy where we can get a whole team together. There was some confusion. People were, my dad's rabidly anti-union. Sorry, Dad. But there's some confusion where they say the teachers are greedy. They're just asking for this thing. They're not advocating for education. Well, there's no teacher's contract now, so any of this advocacy that we do is on behalf of the kids,
Exactly.
purely. Are we willing to pass a budget that does not, because we're required by the School Act to pass a budget that balances?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we willing to do that? And my quick answer is, I don't think that's a great protest, because you get fired. Cowichan, we've heard, right?
Yeah.
Cowichan
Yes.
School Board got fired,
And
replaced
then
by,
they make the cuts anyway and more.
right?
Okay, guys, so we're almost out of time.
Okay,
So
so-
we're gonna ask one more question that is, I feel, I think everyone else will agree, is most important. And one of our questions is, why should we vote for a school trustee if we don't have kids?
Oh, that's
Well,
good.
my answer to that is, do you want to go to a doctor who isn't educated? The reality is, education and educated people are what make our society what it is.
Yeah.
And so we all benefit from education, absolutely and positively, no ifs, ands, or buts. So I think it's critical that people vote in this election for school trustees, regardless of whether they have
Whether you have
children.
kids or not.
The other thing is that how do you want your money spent? You know,
Yeah, because it is taxpayer money as well, even though you don't have kids in school anymore or kids at all, it's still your taxes are going to this sector. So, voting is a way to be part of at least the financial part if you're not connected with a child.
yeah, I don't know. When I see my kids, because my kids are in grade 1 and 3, they're 8 and 6. And when I see them, I don't just see my kids and my interest in their interest. I'm also seeing the people who are going to be, those are the citizens in 14 years.
Yeah.
They're going to be adults and driving cars. And if they're on the street and they're having social problems and health issues that are derived from bad experience in school for some reason, a lower grad rate, those, if 91% now, it's 68 like it was several years ago, I can't remember, but that's a whole lot of people who did not graduate, and the economic spin-ups are
It's huge.
huge,
Yeah, it's
those
huge.
ramifications. So it affects you even if you don't think it does.
Yeah.
So I think we're getting the high sign that we're done.
Is that
Thank
5
you
seconds?
very much.
Yes, thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for
We
your
didn't even get to
time.
ask you guys any questions,
Yeah.
especially you because you just graduated.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
It would have been nice to have an exit interview for
Thank you all.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for
Thanks a lot.
watching.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Meadus, and I'm running for your Maple Ridge City Council. I believe an engaged community is a healthy community. If a senior feels unsafe walking in the downtown core, that matters. If there's no transit in your area and you find yourself waiting for a bus that never shows up, that matters. If you're a local business owner and you're struggling, or you're trying to work in the downtown core but don't have internet access, that matters. If you find yourself spending less time with your family and more time commuting to work, that matters. If you dream of a place you can live, work, and play and want to feel more connected to your community, that matters. I'm Chelsea Meadus. If you feel you don't have a voice, that matters to me. Together, we will do better.